I've watched clients walk into retirement with peace and confidence, and I've also watched others live in constant fear of running out of money. The difference had little to do with their wealth, and more about what I'm going to explain to you today. After advising hundreds of retirees over the last decade, I would argue that much of what the financial industry teaches about retirement spending is fundamentally incorrect. This isn't just theory. This is what I've witnessed firsthand with real people making real-life decisions about their retirement future. Before I dive into today's video, I want to ask, if you find our content useful, please take a minute to like and subscribe to our page. Now let me be clear here. I feel pretty strongly that the conventional wisdom around retirement planning and retirement spending specifically might be just a little bit off. I've seen too many hardworking families over time chasing an arbitrary number which has little to do with their actual values or goals in retirement. So today, I'm going to pull back the curtain on some of the things that I've seen and how understanding these situations might help you better yours in the future. What if I told you that the 80% replacement rule that many advisors preach could be wasting years of your time? In my opinion, this benchmark might be one of the greatest oversimplifications of the retirement planning process around. For those of you unaware of the 80% rule, it boils down to this. Experts sometimes say that you need 80% of your working year income to retire successfully. I recently worked with a couple, let's call them David and Sarah, who spent an additional 3 years working as they were chasing this arbitrary number blindly. When they finally ended up coming to our office, we went through our analysis and figured out that they had oversaved by a dramatic sum. Unfortunately, those additional 3 years working are years that they're not going to get back on their life. The truth is, how much you make during your working years can dramatically impact how much you need for retirement, but this simple fact often gets overlooked when planning. For instance, if you're making $50,000 of earned income through your working years, you might actually need that 80% income replacement. But what if you're earning closer to $200,000? There is indeed research out there showing that you might only need about 55% income replacement to succeed in retirement in that case. Let's think about that for a moment. Not only could that result in unnecessary saved earnings over time, but it could potentially end up in you working longer than you need to. You might be wondering here, why is there such a massive gap? And what number is right for you to allow you to continue on your journey successfully? Let's break down the three factors that I see are often overlooked in this scenario. First things first, our progressive tax system means that higher income workers could face higher tax brackets during their working years in comparison to when their income could theoretically decrease when they retire. Let's break this down for a moment. Take the hypothetical clients, David and Susan, and let's say that they're making $220,000 a year during their working years. At this point in time, they're paying somewhere right around $45,000 in federal tax annually. In their first year of retirement, despite maintaining their comfortable lifestyle, their tax bill actually decreased to just $12,000 in federal taxes a year, or a decrease of 75%. This small caveat could have the potential to boost one's spending power, contrary to what the cookie-cutter systems might calculate. The second thing to take into account is the elimination for potential work-related expenses that you might encounter during your working years. Things like daily commuting costs, a professional wardrobe, dry cleaning, or even workplace meals can significantly stack up. For higher income earners, these expenses typically represent a larger portion of their budget, where when one retires, they might see a fall off of somewhere between 10 to 15% of their expenses. The third factor to take into account is that your baseline living expenses could also decrease during your retirement years. Basic necessities like housing, food, and utilities could end up taking up a larger portion of a low-income earner's budget, while higher income earners tend to spend more on discretionary expenses. These are things that could be a little more easily navigated for the high-income earners during those retirement years. But this is just the beginning of what conventional wisdom from many in the financial industry might actually end up overlooking during one's retirement journey. What if the way you'll actually spend money throughout your retirement journey isn't closely aligned with what's forecasted at all? In the majority of cases that we've witnessed, retirement spending follows a path more closely aligned to what some would call the SMILE pattern. This pattern has three distinct phases, which is contrary to the thought that spending might just increase over a straight line over time. This fundamental disconnect could be causing you years of unnecessary work or artificial spending restrictions due to the fact that it just doesn't align with reality. Picture your spending like a smile on a graph, starting off high, dipping in the middle, and then moving back higher towards the end of retirement. Really honing in and understanding how this pattern works and what it looks like has changed multiple trajectories and outcomes during retirement planning conversations that we've had. By mapping one's specific retirement journey and spending patterns, we're better able to forecast how that journey might play out and when the most opportune time to take the step in the next chapter in life might begin. During the beginning of retirement, also known as the go-go years, which typically occur between ages 65 and 75, hypothetical clients David and Sarah were spending about $75,000 a year. They embraced their newfound freedom and took the opportunity to travel internationally to places that they had only dreamed about during their working time. They were able to spend time with friends and family, in addition to completing passion projects around the house that they weren't able to get to during their working years. What's fascinating is what happened to their spending during this active phase. It actually completely contradicted the straight-line spending pattern that most financial planning programs use. Their actual expenses ended up decreasing by about 1% a year as time moved forward and they satisfied their travel needs and fell into a more regular routine. This natural evolution occurred without any sense of deprivation or budget cutting. But what happened to their spending next is incredibly fascinating. As they entered the next phase of retirement, also known as the slow-go years, typically between ages 75 and 85, their lifestyles naturally transformed in ways they couldn't possibly have imagined prior. Their international adventures gradually changed into just weekend getaways to places that they had come to love. Their dining habits shifted from trying out new restaurants on a weekly basis to hosting more intimate dinner parties with friends and family at their home. During this phase, their annual spending ended up decreasing to about $65,000 a year, which again was a natural progression and didn't include any intentional budget cutting. Though they ended up spending less, they fully embraced these newfound comfortable routines, deepening relationships with family and friends in intimate settings. By their early 80s, David and Sarah transitioned into the final phase of retirement, also known as the no-go years. While their discretionary spending on things like dining out and vacations decreased, the cost of healthcare and medical situations started to rise. Doctor visits became more frequent, the cost of prescriptions started to increase, and they actually went on to invest in in-home care in order to maintain their independence in the home. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the average cost of healthcare in retirement is about $7,030 per year, and these costs tend to increase over time, while other expense categories in retirement decrease. Here's where things get very interesting to me. By taking these spending patterns into account and understanding that the situation is more dynamic than just following a straight line adjusted for inflation over time, you might actually be able to increase your withdrawal rate in the earlier years of retirement as opposed to keeping at a typical flat percentage. On the other hand, you might also be able to retire with less years worked, being that you don't need as much saved up. This revelation might allow you to retire years earlier than one originally thought, or have the confidence to spend more freely in the beginning early years of retirement when you have the time and energy to go out and do what you like. But if the pattern of spending changes so dramatically throughout one's retirement, what happens to that 4% rule that we hear so often and think about as the fundamental foundation to modern retirement planning? Well, in my opinion, the 4% rule is fundamentally flawed, as it doesn't take into account how retirees actually live out their lives. In the event that you don't know what the 4% rule is, it is a very common understanding that a safe or prudent approach to withdrawing your assets in retirement is by following a 4% withdrawal rate based on the value of your portfolio. Although it might seem logical on paper, there's clearly a disconnect between that rigid spending pattern and the lifestyle changes that occur during retirement, which we just discussed. Following this rigid rule could be thought about as trying to cross a river on a tightrope during changing winds. During those go-go years of retirement, where you might be more active, following that strict withdrawal rate of 4% might force you to end up taking funds out of the portfolio at an inopportune time or during market volatility or a downturn. This combination of higher withdrawals coupled with depressed market rates could create what some would call sequence of returns risk, which could have a negative impact on your ability to withdraw from your portfolio over time. The big picture here is that during different market conditions, following strict and rigid guidelines, you could end up feeling like you're being held back during what should be some of the best times of your life. This explains a phenomena in some cases where retirees will decrease the amount of their withdrawals in retirement, often leading to a substantial sum of unspent assets at the time of their passing. And unfortunately, this could end up resulting in missed opportunity when it comes to spending time during one's most vibrant years. So what's the solution to this fundamental mismatch when it comes to traditional withdrawal strategies versus actual spending patterns during one's retirement? Well, for starters, as I previously mentioned, the constant withdrawal rate allows for one's spending to increase or decrease based on the value of their portfolio over time. The downside with this approach is the result in less predictable income on a year-to-year basis. And this is something that some retirees might actually find challenging during the planning process. An alternative strategy is using withdrawal rate guardrails that trigger spending adjustments only when certain thresholds are crossed. This approach can set limits to how much your withdrawals will increase or decrease year over year, potentially allowing you more flexibility and/or more consistency over time. The answer that we're all craving is, what is the best strategy for you? Your retirement spending plan deserves to be as individualized as your fingerprint, clearly reflecting your goals, values, and beliefs. Without a customized approach that takes your specific situation into account, you could end up falling into one of two less desirable situations. The first being oversaving, where you end up sacrificing some of the greatest times of your life because you're worried about spending money, or overspending and undersaving, where you might have to make unwanted adjustments to your retirement later on in life. Both of these scenarios stem from the same fundamental problem: following generic cookie-cutter advice as opposed to having a plan made for you. We've covered a lot today, but one takeaway that I want to focus on is understanding that retirement spending adjusts with your life naturally. It doesn't just move forward in a straight line. The shift from accumulating assets over time to decumulation or spending requires a balance. Your retirement story isn't about spreadsheets, withdrawal rates, or portfolio allocations, although those fundamental factors are important. At its core, retirement planning is about creating the life that you want to live in accordance with your deepest values during the most precious moments in life. By calculating your personalized income replacement rate and taking into account things like your current spending habits, in addition to the twists and turns that you might face during your retirement years, you might be better off and able to embrace the reality of your retirement picture. One key takeaway that I want to address is that I like to think about money as a tool for living a life of purpose, connection, and joy. Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table at 2 a.m, crunching numbers, and they just are not adding up. 3 years into retirement, your retirement savings are vanishing 40% faster than you had forecasted, and inflation, among many other things, is eating into your nest egg. If you've ever felt this stomach-dropping pain about your retirement, you're about to discover the hidden traps that can catch even the most prepared retirees off guard, along with our 4-step retirement budgeting system and how to conquer these fears. Now, here's what many fail to talk about when thinking about retirement planning. I would argue that the biggest threat to your retirement plan is not necessarily overspending your money, but rather not having an understanding where the money is going. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average person aged 65 or older spends about $51,000 a year. But here's the shocking part. Retirees often underestimate their expenses by a whopping 30 to 50%. And here's something we watch all too commonly. Retirees take the step into retirement very confidently that they have planned for all that life will throw their way, only to end up watching themselves spend away their money like water breaking through a dam. The question then that keeps us up at night is, what if we've been thinking about retirement spending and budgeting completely wrong this whole time? Let me tell you about a hypothetical prospect, and we'll call her Sarah, that we met with recently. She worked her entire life, saving up a modest nest egg of $1 million, and she thought she had everything planned and accounted for. She ran her numbers over and over again, and she felt that she was able to cruise into the sunsets. But, with that said, by month 6 of her retirement, she ended up seeing that she was spending a little over $3,000 a month in excess of what she had planned for. The culprit here? It wasn't one make-or-break expense. It essentially was death by 1,000 cuts. This money was going towards things like forgotten gym memberships, subscription fees to streaming services, excess money spent on travel, you name it. Small leaks when handled on their own. However, when they add up, small leaks can turn into financial sinkholes. What Sarah quickly discovered, and what I'm going to reveal to you today, is that budgeting and spending during your retirement years follow a different set of rules than budgeting and spending while you're working. And if you don't understand these rules, you can eventually find yourself in quite the precarious situation. In Sarah's particular situation, those unaccounted for expenses might seem minuscule at first glance. However, they pale in comparison to the unexpected healthcare costs that she might face later down the line. Fidelity's recent research has shown the average person age 65 could need upwards of $165,000 in retirement to pay for healthcare costs. For couples, this number could be north of $330,000. And here's the kicker. Those numbers don't include long-term care costs. Should you need care in the home or care within a facility, you could see expenses rise by tens of thousands of dollars per month. You could end up spending well over $120,000 per year. However, about 70% of pre-retirees don't have this cost worked into their retirement plan at all. Think about that for a moment. You could have worked your entire life, saved up $1 million portfolio, and felt that you were good to go. However, just one extended illness could put it all in jeopardy. And while you might think, it's not too bad, I'll just cut out the fun stuff if things get tight, here's where retirement psychology really kicks in, and it gets kind of scary. After facing decades of potential delayed gratification during your working years, retirees go through psychological changes as they near retirement or are in retirement, which can be quite powerful. You could develop a feeling that you deserve those vacations, or those exquisite dinners, or even extravagant gifts to your grandchildren. The problem is, discretionary spending sometimes has a tendency to snowball like an avalanche. Take travel, for instance. Many people will commonly budget somewhere around $5,000 a trip, when in fact, you might end up spending in excess of $10,000 because while you're on vacation, you're feeling nice and comfortable and more willing to spend. It's not just flights and hotels that come into play when thinking about travel. It's the smaller things. Things like gas, meals, or even gifts. And believe me, they can add up pretty quickly, even if you've paid off your mortgage. And by the way, if you have, congratulations. Your home is still not free to live in. In fact, the journey might just be getting started. Because as homes age, things need to be repaired. And that 1% that you have earmarked aside and saved up to care for the home might quickly turn into 2%, 3%, or more. Something like a new roof is a necessity, and it could cost you upwards of $20,000. Or a dysfunctional HVAC system. That could go somewhere between $8,000 to $10,000. Plumbing issues, electrical updates, replacing a floor, these aren't tiny costs. These budget busters could potentially become major and eventually derail your entire plan. But what I would consider to be more of an insidious threat is something that I refer to as lifestyle creep. It's not the one big purchase that destroys your entire plan in this situation. It's the slow, steady buildup of potentially unnecessary luxury items that accumulate over time. These could amount to dozens of small expenses, which end up draining thousands of dollars from your savings throughout the course of the year. And here's a quite sobering exercise. Go back and check your bank statements from a few years ago and compare them to now. In many cases, when we go through this exercise with clients, we'll end up finding recurring charges that are taking place now that they did not have years ago. Now imagine that same lifestyle creep over the course of 20 to 30 years compounded. Another statistic that brings me an unsettling feeling is that an estimated 40% of retirees have no emergency savings whatsoever. In certain cases, we'll come across a situation where someone might roll their entire savings into their retirement accounts and essentially just cross their fingers and hope for the best. And although we are the eternal optimists, we do believe in expecting the unexpected, especially when it comes to planning for retirement. Healthcare emergencies, home repairs, helping adult children or aging parents, these are just some of the things that we see come up on a regular basis. In planning for things like this, freaking out and making drastic changes might not be the best course of action, but rather more so being aware that these situations could occur. Planning for and developing a so-called cushion might help you prevent from having to tap into your retirement savings at an unwanted time, taking on additional debt, or in general, making irrational or emotional decisions. So what do you do to plan to avoid for these potential issues? Our answer lies in our systematic approach to how we deal with each single one of these situations. Step 1 is having brutal honesty with yourself and your advisors on where your money is actually going. Not where you think it goes, not where you hope it goes, but where it actually goes. This means gathering your bank statements, your credit card statements, and all of your bills for a minimum of the last 3 to 6 months and examining them with the intensity of a forensic accountant. In walking through this exercise, everyone on your team involved in your planning can gain a better understanding of what your actual cash flow is like. Once you've gathered and analyzed your data, take the time to organize things into 2 strict categories: essential spending and discretionary spending. Essential spending are things that are non-negotiable. such as housing and shelter, your vehicle, food, utilities, taxes, etc. These are things that help keep you alive, healthy, and housed. Everything else can go into the discretionary bucket. This includes things like hobbies, travel, dining out, and entertainment. Although it might feel tough at first, here's the reason why this is so important. This practice can help you actually visualize how much financial flexibility you might have in case of facing hardship. You could end up finding out that your essential spending is 40 to 60% lower than your actual overall spending. And that addition of the 40 to 60% extra represents choices and flexibility. When you know exactly how much you have to spend to live, you can then take the steps forward to become the architect of your lifestyle. Step 2 is understanding your different sources of income and your investment mix and matching those with your essential expenses. Initially, consider taking those essential expenses and lining them up with your baseline sources of income, things like Social Security or a pension. And here's where the magic happens. By doing this, you could potentially bring peace of mind to yourself should you have to face unexpected events in life. Things such as market volatility, surprise expenses, or even emotional investment decisions might bring you less stress if you have your ducks in a row. For example, if your essential expenses are about $7,000 a month, and you have a pension and Social Security combining for about $8,500, you now have a buffer which could help you out mentally in the long haul. On the other hand, if there's a gap between your essential expenses and those steady streams of income, it's not necessarily reason to panic. This is where strategic thinking can come into play, as you may take this opportunity to understand where you can cut some of your expenses. Does it make sense to potentially cut your cost of housing by relocating? Or maybe reduce your cost of energy by developing an energy efficient home? Do you really need 4 vehicles, or can you cut down? And these situations are not about living with less, but rather living within your means so you could potentially gain more control over your life. With your essential expenses now covered, step 3 takes a focus on what many look forward to in retirement. Building a life that you enjoy and a retirement worth living can be funded by the discretionary spending that you have. This is where you can start to be intentional about doing things that truly bring you joy, whether it be exotic travels, fine dining experiences, or even just deepening relationships with family and friends. And here's a key that I have found to be crucial. When it comes to discretionary spending, set clear boundaries. An example could be maybe allocating $20,000 to $30,000 annually for travel, or $1,000 to $2,000 a month for fine dining. Try not to think of these boundaries as restrictions, but rather a mental placeholder to, again, help you in the steps to feel confident in taking control of your retirement. Now, this is where the system can get truly powerful. Again, reverting back to our previous discussion on essential expenses and having them covered, now you can look to potentially flex your spending over time with those discretionary expenses. Examples here, in years when your investments outperform what your expectation was, maybe you increase that budget and take the extra trip. Or maybe you go ahead and make a larger gift than normal. On the other hand, during leaner years, take a step back and shrink that discretionary spending without having to feel sacrifice for your regular daily life. The 4th step is about preparing for the unexpected and potentially inevitable. Emergencies and inflation. The things that seemingly come out of nowhere, whether it be a home repair, a health emergency, or a family medical need. When you have this cushion and plan in place, these situations can feel more minuscule and manageable as opposed to major disasters. When it comes to inflation, something that might shock you is a modest 3% rate of inflation over the course of 25 years can almost cut your spending power in half. The value of $200,000 in today's dollars decreases over that time to almost $100,000 in spending power. And this is why we bake in adjustment inflations when walking through planning with our clients. In addition, we make sure that we're reviewing their budgeting and spending on a regular basis. I feel strongly that the overlying takeaway here is that building and implementing a plan helps you have flexibility. In addition, it's very important to remember that every journey starts with one step forward. Although it could be time-consuming and stressful to gather all of your financial information for the course of 3 to 6 months, it can also help you feel empowered and educated about your specific situation. This exercise could end up being a major difference in just simply hoping that your money lasts as long as you do versus spending your money confidently in retirement. What if I told you The cookie-cutter retirement advice that you've been following for years could be costing you significant sums of your wealth. The wait until 70 Social Security strategy that many folks in the financial industry talk about could come with unintended consequences. In the case of John, a 62-year-old recent retiree who had amassed a sum of $1 million in retirement savings, learned this through watching his friends during the stock market crashes of 2008. Here's what common advice when it comes to Social Security claiming strategies might neglect to tell you. For some retirees at age 62, taking the money right away could provide not only an immediate source of income, but it also can come with a multitude of additional benefits. What made John's situation different here? He was a new retiree. He had amassed a sum of $1 million in his retirement savings accounts. He was living in his home mortgage-free, and he had a small pension that covered about 30% of his annual expenses. He could be seen as a typical perfect candidate to delay benefits. When he first consulted a financial advisor, he received the typical advice in stating, wait until you're 70. For every year after you reach full retirement age, you'll receive an 8% increase in your Social Security benefit. But what that advisor completely missed was that by claiming Social Security early, John was able to cope with one of his biggest fears. John had previously witnessed something traumatic that completely changed his entire outlook on his retirement plan. His primary concern was market volatility and losing large sums of money in retirement, as he'd watched friends previously go through the market crash in 2008, as well as the downturn during COVID. The math seemed pretty straightforward. At age 62, John would receive $1,800 per month in Social Security benefits. If he decided to wait till 70, that number would jump up to $3,100 per month. That's an increase of $15,600 a year. But this situation isn't just about the difference in the size of your monthly check. It's about what happens to the entirety of your portfolio during times of volatility. This is where sequence of returns risk comes into play, which is a technical term stating that the returns that you experience earlier on in your retirement life could disproportionately affect your long-term horizon had they not been planned for prior. What John found out here actually shocked him. By claiming his benefits at age 62, he was actually able to take $21,600 less per year out of his retirement savings. But here's a revelation that John found even more shocking. By age 85, his portfolio had increased by an additional $132,000 despite receiving smaller Social Security checks due to his early claiming strategy. The preservation of capital during these crucial early retirement years had a compounding effect, far beyond what a traditional break-even analysis might result in. You might be wondering, but what about market downturns? Doesn't a strategy like this expose you to more risk over time? In 2022, a year where the markets turned down about 20%, John had a secret weapon up his sleeve that other retirees who chose to delay taking Social Security might not have, and that's flexibility. He temporarily reduced his retirement withdrawals during that time period, relying more on Social Security to allow the volatility to calm down. This flexibility gave John options during the market turmoil instead of forcing him to sell assets while they were declining. But the financial advantages didn't stop there. Something that many retirement calculators fail to take into account is the significant uptick in potential for tax ramifications later down the road in retirement. In John's case, upon reaching age 72, he'll be forced to take minimum withdrawals from his retirement account, also known as required minimum distributions. For those who delay Social Security until age 70, that income, combined with the income from required minimum distributions, could cause a massive storm as far as taxes are concerned. Something to be aware of is that there are certain tax thresholds specifically when it comes to Social Security income, which unfortunately tends to be overlooked during planning conversations. For married couples filing jointly, Social Security benefits become partially taxable when annual income exceeds $32,000. Upon passing $44,000 in annual income, 85% of Social Security benefits become taxable. In case you're unaware, the term combined income includes your adjusted gross income, your non-taxable interest, and half of your Social Security benefits. Let me walk you through the math here real quick. Had John waited till age 70 to take his Social Security benefit, that number would have been $37,200, of which half, $18,600, would have counted towards his combined income. Add in his $30,000 pension and roughly $40,000 required minimum distribution at age 72, and John's income far exceeds that of which 85% of his Social Security benefit becomes eligible for taxation. But by claiming at age 62, John had a completely different situation to help him navigate this potential issue. He even decided to take a step further and go a road less traveled. During those lower income years between ages 62 and 72, John decided to convert portions of his pre-tax retirement account to a Roth retirement account. He paid taxes at lower rates than he would have had he waited down the line. And in this situation, John was able to significantly decrease his lifetime tax burden. By age 72, due to making these Roth conversions over time, John's traditional pre-tax retirement account had a lower balance, allowing him to smooth out the tax burden over the course of the rest of retirement. But here's what makes the situation truly powerful. By making these strategic Roth conversions over time, John again created flexibility for his overall picture. Now I can hear some of you saying, but what if I live a really long time? Won't I miss out on all that extra potential Social Security income? This brings us to the third factor in John's decision. And this situation goes far beyond spreadsheets and tax codes, and could even be arguably the most important dynamic going on here in John's life. What's the actual value of having an extra $1,800 in your 60s versus an extra $3,100 in your 70s? The answer in John's situation reveals something profound about how one might think about retirement. Have you ever considered that money has different values at different stages in life? This isn't just philosophical, it's economical as well. Think about it this way. A concert ticket has a tremendous amount of value leading up to and before a show. However, after that show takes place, the ticket is essentially now worthless. Similarly, retirement dollars have utility value depending on when you can use them. Money in your more active early retirement years allow you to do things like travel when you might not physically be able to do so later on in life. This gives that money a higher value during that certain period in time. Research has shown that one's spending habits in retirement start to decline significantly once reaching the age of 75. In your 60s and early 70s, you might be more energetic, more healthy, and more likely to travel, while after reaching age 75, you might enjoy a more quiet lifestyle. This raises a very important question. Why go through the planning to maximize income at a time when you might value it less? For John, this consideration was central to his decision making. It was he and his wife's number one priority to ensure that while they were younger and healthy, that they could go out and travel the world. He wanted to help his grandchildren while they were in college and while he was here and around to see it, not years later. And perhaps, most important in John's situation, he wanted freedom from financial stress, especially during those earlier years of retirement. In the 5 years after claiming Social Security at age 62, John and his wife were able to take 3 major international trips that he might have chosen to delay otherwise had the markets been volatile. They were able to contribute $15,000 towards their oldest grandchild's college education, watching her proudly as she entered her college dorm. In addition to that, they were able to create the garden and patio they had always dreamed of, spaces that would eventually be used for hosting family and friends during intimate times. That stream of income early on allowed John to focus on what really meant most to him, allowing him to create memories as opposed to looking at his accounts during times of market turmoil. Beyond math and spreadsheets, what John gained was perhaps the most valuable asset of all. He was able to have peace of mind to enjoy the times while he could. That extra stream of dependable income early in those retirement years allowed John to make decisions that he never would have otherwise had he delayed that benefit. While the mathematics of delayed claiming might work out on paper for those lucky enough to live into their 80s or 90s, what spreadsheets don't take into account is the joy that filled John when he was able to hold his granddaughter's hand at graduation, or the time that he spent with his wife during those 3 lifetime trips they were able to take. Now, I want to be clear, this strategy is not meant for everybody, and depending on your personal situation, maximizing your Social Security income might still be a priority. For many retirees who have amassed great sums of wealth in their retirement and investment accounts, conventional wisdom sometimes falls short. Before you make your Social Security decision, stop and ask yourself these 3 questions. First and foremost, how would your portfolio be protected in the case of market volatility if you choose to take that Social Security income early? Secondly, by claiming early, will you be opening up any potential for tax strategies that could help mitigate taxes later on down the road? And thirdly, are there any experiences that you want to take out of life early on while you're still healthy and able to, that delaying benefits might prevent you from doing? I want you to imagine 2 retirement scenarios. The first being claiming Social Security benefits at age 62 with smaller checks, and the second being claiming Social Security benefits at age 70 with checks that could be 76% larger. Which path leads to more money over your lifetime? And how does this decision impact your financial security as well as your overall well-being? The answer can vary dramatically based on your specific situation, and today I'm going to walk you through the 15-year journey of two couples who made completely different choices. Their experiences reveal three critical pillars that could help you determine which strategy is right for you, but might be missing from the planning conversations that you're having today. Now, let me introduce to you two couples who lived next door to each other in a quiet suburb on Long Island for the past 3 decades. The Smith family and the Jones family held similar positions in the same company over the course of their careers. Each family accumulated $500,000 in retirement savings and have exactly the same Social Security benefits at retirement. Yet today, at age 77, these once parallel lives have diverged completely based on a choice they made 15 years ago. When the Smiths reached the age of 62, John had some pretty concerning news come up in his annual physical. This gave him pause when it came to his decision in retirement. John explained to his financial advisor that his father didn't make it past the age of 72, and he wanted to enjoy his life while he still had his time and his health. The Smiths decided to claim their Social Security benefits early, at age 62, where they received a combined monthly income of $2,800, which was dramatically reduced from what they would have received at full retirement age or even age 70. The Jones family, on the other hand, decided to do the exact opposite, and they decided that they wanted to wait until age 70 to maximize their Social Security income. At the time, Robert and Sarah Jones really enjoyed their working lives, and they were able to negotiate down to working part-time for the companies that they were engaged with, allowing them to continue to work, earn income, but not have all the stresses of full-time employment. Their decision to wait and claim benefits at age 70 allowed them to collect a monthly income combined for a total of $4,928, which is approximately 76% higher than their neighbors, the Smiths. In making the decision to claim their Social Security benefits at age 62, the Smiths had an annual combined income of $33,600, which allowed them to preserve their retirement accounts for a longer period of time. The Joneses, on the other hand, continued to work approximately 20 hours weekly, where Robert worked as a consultant and Sarah worked as a piano teacher. During their monthly dinners together, the Smith family communicated with the Jones family that they felt a sense of security by having that Social Security income coming in on a regular basis, and they really stopped worrying about what was going on in the markets. During those dinners, at some points in time, the Jones family did express anxiety about waiting to collect their Social Security benefits, especially when they faced market volatility. In the early years, both couples seemed content. The Smith family was able to enjoy things like bucket list items such as traveling abroad, while the Jones family continued to work part-time and allowed their retirement savings to accumulate. Neither families initially expressed regrets, but eventually mathematical realities did start to form in the shape of consequences. The big question became, would the Smith family end up trading the fact that they had financial freedom earlier on end up proving costly later in life? And, on the flip side, would the Jones family patience in waiting to claim their benefits end up proving to be the right decision for them? While actuarial tables might project one certain outcome, life doesn't always follow a stable path. 15 years later, their financial trajectories couldn't be more different, proving how one decision might seemingly be small, however, it could reverberate through your entire retirement planning future. The dramatic gap between these couples' financial situations by age 77 actually started to form within the first 5 years of them and their claiming strategies. Many retirees tend to focus on that immediate gratification in taking Social Security at age 62, while not having a full understanding of how their retirement account withdrawal rate could dramatically increase over time, especially if the unexpected occurs. The Smiths embraced their newfound freedom with enthusiasm, and after they went on their bucket list trips, they settled down to a retirement community where they were happy. Morning coffee on the patio, afternoon golf for John, and weekly dinner with friends became their norm. Initially, their Social Security income provided a great foundation for them, and their retirement withdrawals were relatively modest. By year 3, unexpected situations started to arise. Their retirement community announced a 15% increase in their monthly fees, and that $450 per month increase in costs was not covered by the Social Security income. Despite the cost of living adjustments of roughly 2% per year to Social Security, their income ended up falling much short of their actual expenses over time. The Smiths found themselves cutting back on simple pleasures, stopping the weekly dinners at restaurants, John cutting back on his golfing, and going out less with friends. To maintain their lifestyle, they ended up having to increase their withdrawal rate from their retirement accounts significantly. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the Joneses found great joy in their part-time work. Robert's consulting work allowed him supplemental income, in addition to the feeling of keeping his mind sharp, while Sarah was able to continue to teach piano lessons, bring in income, and find joy in watching other people succeed. Their retirement savings over the course of this time remained untouched, growing to about $575,000, or a 15% increase over the course of that 5 years. When the market experienced a significant downturn in year 4, the Smith family found themselves feeling great anxiety. They felt that every dollar that they had withdrawn from their retirement accounts wouldn't be part of any eventual rebound. The Joneses, on the other hand, were able to weather the storm better. Their continual income allowed them not only to not have to dip into those retirement accounts, but actually contribute to them during the downturn. Healthcare costs emerged as another factor for the Smiths. Before Medicare eligibility, the rising premiums from their health insurance policies far outpaced the cost of living adjustments of Social Security. John's prescription medications rose by $200 per month, slightly dipping into their already vulnerable retirement savings. They ended up withdrawing $125,000 over that 5-year period, bringing their retirement account balance to $375,000. One evening, Mary shared her concerns with John, stating that she was kind of worried and wondering if they should have waited to claim Social Security benefits. John then reminded her that the decision was made in a big way because of his health concerns. However, when he was in private, he shared the same exact feeling of worry as well. As the Joneses reached their 70th birthday milestone, they finally collected the Social Security income that they'd been waiting for over that time. Their monthly income of $4,928 proved to be a great decision on their part, as their retirement accounts ended up growing to about $600,000. At the same time, the Smiths were entering their 8th year of taking Social Security when John's health issues really started to emerge. Despite their Medicare coverage, John required specialized treatments which cost $30,000 out of pocket per year. This caused them to further dip into their retirement accounts. The stress started to pile up, and ultimately, John went through many sleepless nights, while Mary spent time hiding the medical bills to avoid having the tough conversations about their mounting expenses. Medicare wouldn't cover all of this, and the treatments and expenses really started to pile up and stress Mary and John out both financially and emotionally. Around the 8-year mark, a financial shift started to occur between the two couples, which is sometimes known as the crossover point. Like a scale slowly tipping, the Joneses' larger monthly income really dramatically started to outweigh the Smiths' decision to take the income earlier. By year 10, their financial paths had completely diverged, with the Smiths' retirement accounts falling to a mere $300,000, while the Joneses watched their retirement grow to $650,000. When both couples faced an identical home expense of $12,000, the Smiths had to reach further into their retirement funds, while the Joneses had accumulated a nice cushion due to their higher monthly income, so their retirement plan went untouched. These different positions affected both couples psychologically. Mary Smith had become overwhelmed with fear and started checking the investment accounts on a daily basis, which drove that fear further to spiral downhill. John Smith reflected, "If I had known we were going to go through this much turbulence in life, I may have changed my mind and made the decision to hold off on claiming benefits early." While Sarah Jones reflected on their decision, a remarkable financial situation began to take shape at the 15-year mark. The cumulative numbers over time tell a story that challenges conventional wisdom when it comes to claiming Social Security benefits. Despite the Smiths' 8-year head start in collecting retirement benefits, the Joneses have actually accumulated more money in a short period of time, outweighing the decision to take benefits early. This is an illustration of how compounding of the cost of living adjustments over time can provide to be great in a certain situation. Financial reality really started to set in for the Smiths when they had to make the decisions to start cutting back further, cutting back on things like spending on their grandchildren, cutting back further on golf as far as John was concerned, cutting back further on hosting holidays, and doing things that they truly enjoyed. In this instance, the Joneses' claiming strategy has proven to be valuable against inflation, as their larger monthly income would allow them to combat expenses that smaller income certainly just could not. They were actually pleased to find out that the decisions that they made allowed them to maintain their financial security, even though their daughter faced a career change and they had to help support her as well. When it comes to healthcare expenses, the two stories show completely different paths as well. While the Smiths were cautious in spending and dipping into their savings and sometimes foregoing treatment, the Joneses were able to do whatever they had to do. Both experiences reveal 3 critical questions everyone should ask when making these decisions. Number 1, how realistic is your healthcare assessment? Number 2, what are the other sources of income that will complement your Social Security income in retirement? And number 3, what are you going to do to combat inflation? The Smiths and Joneses story make one thing clear, that claiming Social Security is more than just a mathematical equation. Their contrasting experiences highlight how making one decision can reverberate through your entire financial future. So what's the real takeaway between the difference in the tales of these two couples? While the math matters, your particular financial situation outweighs everything. While delaying benefits might yield higher payouts over time, the right choice depends on your particular circumstances and working with the professionals around you to figure those out. A team of trusted professionals can help you integrate your outlook on Social Security, your claiming strategy, your healthcare situation and needs, in addition to all of the other things that go into retirement planning. Did you know that more than 60% of Americans don't have a will? This means that more than half of us risk having our hard-earned assets distributed by state laws rather than by our own wishes. It's like taking decades to build a beautiful home and then handing the keys over to a stranger who decides who gets to live there. If you're approaching retirement and you haven't taken the time to update your estate plan recently, you could be missing critical points of protection which could end up costing your family unnecessary costs or taxes down the road. Stick with me today as we're going to cover some of the crucial points that we cover during our estate planning reviews, which we commonly see missing when we meet with clients for the first time. Most people nowadays think they might have their estate planning covered by a simple will. But let me share something shocking with you. According to caring.com, while 33% of people might have a will completed, about 80% of people are missing at least one crucial piece of their estate planning documentation. This gap creates what I consider to be a protection illusion, where one might feel a sense of security, but one's family might be vulnerable emotionally and financially down the road due to inadequate protections in place. Let me illustrate this for you with a hypothetical family that unfortunately had to learn this out the hard way. John and Martha had recently retired at the age of 62. They had a modest nest egg, they had their home fully paid off, and they had a simple will completed recently by an attorney. A common phrase we might hear in a situation like this during our client meetings is, "We've got this covered." Although a will might outline assets set to be inherited at some point, what many don't realize is that will does not take effect until death, potentially leaving one vulnerable during a time of incapacitation. Unfortunately, sometimes in life, unexpected things occur. And in this situation, John ended up suffering a stroke months later. When Martha tried to access their accounts to pay for specialized care needed by John, she hit an unfortunate roadblock. And at this point in time, she realized that all of their accounts were only in John's name. Despite being John's spouse, not having the right documentation in place left Martha completely powerless. What followed was a nightmare of legal proceedings during a time where Martha was already under duress due to John's condition. At this point, Martha learned that she had to petition to be John's guardian and conservator, a process that ended up taking months of time and thousands of dollars in fees. As bills mounted, investment opportunities diminished, and Martha spent sleepless nights worrying about legal proceedings in addition to having to worry about her husband's care. The court eventually approved Martha as financial conservator, but the mental damage had already been done. The protection that John and Martha did not have in place at this time comes from two key incapacitation tools. The first being a healthcare proxy or medical power of attorney, and the second being a financial power of attorney. Each of these documents are examples where you allow somebody that you trust to take care of you first in a healthcare setting, and second in a financial setting if you are not able to do so yourself. These statistics about incomplete protection aren't just concerning. They can actually end up being devastating to one's heirs. While you might think your estate plan has you covered, a significant change to legislation took place years back, which completely changed the game as far as retirement accounts are concerned. In 2019, Congress passed the Secure Act. And among other things, this act did change the way that retirement account inheritance works. If your estate planning hasn't been updated since then, unfortunately, a hunk of your hard-earned savings could end up in the hands of the IRS as opposed to the hands of your loved ones. It's important to note that this type of planning requires regular ongoing maintenance, as over time, laws might change, as well as the variables in one's life. In this instance, the Secure Act eliminated the stretch rule, where at one point you were able to take out required minimum distributions from inherited accounts over the course of your lifetime. And now you have to empty those accounts out over the course of 10 years. This accelerated timeline could potentially push your heirs into a higher tax bracket, which could end up forcing them to pay thousands of dollars in excess taxes. Being that this landscape is constantly changing, let's take a look at 5 critical documents as part of your estate plan and how they might pertain to you. First up on the list is the comprehensive will. Some might consider this the foundation to one's overall plan. Think of it as a blueprint when you're constructing your legacy. Your will can do things like help you distribute assets, help you designate guardianship for your children, or even distribute digital assets and other valuables to avoid family members getting into fights. The second item to consider is the Advanced Healthcare Directive or Living Will. This document will act as your voice in the event that you are unable to speak, and it'll outline your preferences for healthcare treatment. Without these instructions, family members might disagree on your healthcare preferences during a time which is already stressful and could unfortunately cause unnecessary conflict. Third up is the healthcare proxy, which will designate somebody that you trust to make healthcare decisions for you in the case you are unable to do so. This person ends up becoming your medical advocate, ensuring that your wishes are followed rather than defaulting to state-mandated policies. Selecting someone who understands your values when it comes to medical care is similar to selecting a navigator to be by your sides through choppy waters. The fourth tool to consider is a durable financial power of attorney, which allows the selected agent to handle your financial needs during a time of incapacity. This document acts like a financial safeguard, preventing accounts from being frozen and allow things like bill pay to continue going on while you are not able to do so yourself. Finally, consider the different type of trust accounts as well, and see if they might be appropriate for your specific situation. A properly structured trust can act similar to a protective container, preserving your assets and allowing them to be used to follow through in accordance with your wishes. Something like a standard revocable trust can help you avoid probate with your assets when passing them to the next generation. But there are also specialized trusts which can be geared towards different matters and goals as well. A few examples of specialized trusts could include something like a marital trust, which could be used when planning for estate taxes, a spendthrift trust, which could help to protect those who are financially irresponsible from financial and investment mismanagement, a special needs trust, which can help provide support for those who are disabled while being careful not to jeopardize government benefits, or a business trust, which can help facilitate succession planning or even potentially reduce tax liability. By reviewing these crucial documents and understanding how they might pertain to you, you can make sure all of your affairs are in order and focus on what really matters most. If you were to ask me what's preventing 2/3 of Americans from protecting their legacy, I'd say the answer probably lies in the myths convincing those same folks that they don't need planning at all. Let's use an example of our friend Sarah, a middle school teacher living a modest lifestyle in her suburban home. Sarah believed that estate planning is only for the ultra-wealthy, and someone in her position living a relatively simple life wouldn't benefit from having that planning done for her. When Sarah unexpectedly passed away at the young age of 58 years old, her children ended up finding out that she had an estate worth roughly $750,000, including her retirement accounts, her home, and her life insurance policies. Without having the proper planning and documentation in place, or the proper beneficiaries listed, unfortunately Sarah's estate went through a lengthy period of time in the courts over the course of 18 months. Her children ended up having to face mounting legal fees, tax uncertainties, and emotional strain having to deal with bureaucracy during a time where they were already grieving. Needless to say, this outcome is probably less than desirable for most. With that, we try to educate our clients about common myths when it comes to estate planning reviews during our meetings. These myths include the following. Myth number 1, I don't have enough money or assets to need an estate plan. Unfortunately, this common misconception can end up leading families of all different financial scenarios to complications which could potentially have been avoided had they done the planning properly. Myth number 2, my spouse will get everything when I'm gone automatically. Unfortunately, this might not be the case, and due to some state intestacy laws, assets could end up getting split between your spouse and other relatives. This could end up forcing a sale of illiquid assets in something like a home or a business, which could end up creating financial and tax complications down the road. Myth number 3, my family knows what I want. The reality of the fact of the matter is that studies show that even close family members only correctly predict healthcare preferences 65% of the time. This gap can lead to painful disagreements during already strenuous times. In some cases, this can end up leading to decisions being made which actually are against your real wishes. And myth number 4, estate planning is just too expensive. The reality here is that in some cases, having the proper documentation and planning put in place is less expensive when compared to the potential costs of probate, additional lawyers and fees, or unnecessary taxes for not planning properly. It's very important to note and to keep top of mind that your estate plan is very similar to your life, and in many cases, it is not just static. Over time, things change and laws evolve, and keeping on top of your planning could be beneficial. In addition to that, understanding when a good time to look at things is also important. Going through changes like marriage, divorce, birth, or death could all be reason to check your documentation. Estate planning reviews can help to bring peace of mind. Having a plan that is current and up to date and outlines your goals and values can help not only to alleviate anxiety, but also can help to empower you to feel that your legacy is properly laid out for the future. Who's going to take care of you when you're older? If you're child-free, you might have thought about this at some point in your life. But here's what nobody tells you. Having children provides no guarantee that they're going to take care of you later on in life. And conversely, not having children could require a completely different roadmap to retirement and beyond. While your friends with children might find themselves planning for college education as well as estate planning techniques, you might face an entirely different set of challenges that traditional planning doesn't take into account. Today, I'm going to speak about what I would consider to be 3 crucial blind spots that traditional retirement planning does not address for those who are planning and have no children. In addition, we're going to talk about actions that you can take to limit feeling vulnerable during your golden years and address these situations. Have you ever sat back and wondered who's going to take care of you when you're no longer physically able to? Traditional retirement planning has an unspoken situation which typically takes into account the fact that one's children might take care of them past the age of retirement as they go into their elderly years. By the year 2033, Genworth assumes that the cost of a private room in a healthcare facility could cost upwards of $157,000 per year. And to that point, something that many don't take into account is the fact that Medicare will more than likely only cover a small portion of that overall cost. In fact, Medicare typically only covers short-term rehabilitation, leaving the cost of long-term care solely up to you and those around you. When I sit down and meet with clients who have no children, one of my main focuses is their long-term care strategy. Unfortunately, many don't tend to think about this until they've reached their 70s or 80s, as they've gone about living life as they were always used to previously. This tends more often than not to put people in quite the precarious situation, as by the time that you realize that you need help and you might be having health issues, it could be too late to go about looking for some sort of insurance or additional sources of care at that time. Consider the case of our hypothetical friend Mary, someone who was a child-free retiree. She had saved a considerable sum of money, and she thought that she had an adequate amount to take care of her long-term care going forward through retirement. However, she underestimated the situation and unfortunately at some point needed long-term care for the course of 3 years, at which point she was forced to tap in and drain a substantial sum of her retirement funds. Mary hadn't factored in the long-term care costs over time, and unfortunately the burden ended up becoming a big stress on her overall financial situation. This is why planning for long-term care through various means becomes particularly important for those who are going about having a child-free retirement. Conversely, hypothetical friends Jim and Jane, also child-free retirees, made the unconventional decision to start discussions about retirement and long-term care early on. They ended up saving in a separate bucket of money, which was geared towards growth and their long-term care needs for the future. While many might not go about thinking about these things until they're later on in their retirement planning journey, typically in their late 40s or 50s, Jim and Jane's decision ended up panning out well for them in their future. Another interesting question to consider, if you're planning on being a child-free retiree, is how much earlier are you actually able to retire, not having those additional potential expenses associated with children? Although this answer could be different from everybody, depending on a multitude of scenarios, there could be an opportunity for you to take advantage of this, providing that you start planning early on. The fundamental mistake that I've seen many people make over time is that they assume that just simply saving is going to be sufficient. Unfortunately, given typical retirement advice, there could end up being many gaps in that plan. Some of the variables to keep in mind is accumulating funds for services like professional healthcare advocacy, as well as professional care services overall. Beyond the traditional care services lies an entire ecosystem of practical services that traditional planning doesn't factor in. While conventional retirement planning could focus on savings rates and investment returns, it might miss out on things like the additional potential for another $1,000 to $3,000 a month in added care that one might need if they don't have a child to fill that role. In this instance, we need to take a minute and think practically. Think back to the last time you were sick. Who brought you your food and water? Or better yet, who picked up your prescriptions when you couldn't get out of bed? For many adults further on in life, these tasks might seem small and could be handled by their children. However, if you are going about being a child-free retiree, you need to take other things into consideration. Something which is as simple as transportation could really add up if you're no longer able to drive safely yourself. Add in things like regular meal delivery, home maintenance, home cleaning, and technology support, and next thing you know, your retirement budget could potentially expand exponentially. This is where aging life care managers can become an essential component of one's retirement plan. These professionals, previously known as geriatric care managers, might handle critical coordinated efforts in order to help you live your life in a simple way as you had prior to needing them. They can do things like help you in a healthcare setting, coordinate your service providers, and help you make it through complex life decisions. The bottom line here is, building a proper support network starts years before you think you need the help and requires intentional planning in order to do so. This means doing things like joining a community with strong social infrastructure, aligning yourself with various service providers, and ensuring that your legal documentation lists out clearly your preferences for care. Power of attorney documentation, healthcare proxies, and care panels, which is a group of people who have agreed to monitor your well-being over time, become crucial parts of your retirement plan as you grow older. Rather than focusing on just the typical growth or income strategy in retirement, really honing in and focusing on the different buckets of money geared towards these specialized services might require you to maintain more liquidity than the standard retirement plan. This shift in strategy focuses on making sure that you have the resources needed precisely when you need them without having to potentially sell off assets in a random time that might not be as opportune. Beyond creating a support network, which is obviously very, very important, another major challenge could be faced by those going about a child-free retirement, and that is the legacy vacuum. While those with children might feel that they have a clear-cut goal to generate and preserve assets over time to then pass to the next generation, those living a child-free retirement might end up asking themselves, what's going to happen to everything that I've built when I'm not here? This purpose vacuum can cause a psychological disconnect, which manifests in surprising financial behaviors. I've personally observed two specific patterns over time which can both be problematic if not addressed quickly. The first being spending down retirement assets in a very short period of time, not having the thought in mind that you need to preserve money as there's no one to pass it to later on in life. And the second being the complete opposite, saving excess monies over time and being plagued with the feeling of not knowing what to do with that money, where they end up not spending anything and not enjoying life. Those who overspend tend to risk depleting their assets too early on and not being able to have money later on down the line to do what they really enjoy. Meanwhile, excess savers also might lose out on the opportunity to enjoy the money as they hold on too tightly and neglect to spend it on themselves and pursue their goals, travels, or any other objectives that they want to achieve. This situation can also have an impact on retirement timing decisions, as those end up working longer than they may have to, where they lack a compelling reason to retire. So how can child-free individuals fulfill this purpose vacuum and build a retirement plan geared towards what they want to do in life? A helpful strategy that we've seen over time is reframing retirement planning around personal goals and values as opposed to familial obligations. This requires identifying causes and purposes that resonate deeply within you, and then going on to restructure your financial situation to align with your values. For many child-free individuals, going the route of philanthropy could be something to consider, as this is a way to provide a legacy for yourself and for an organization that means most to you. Commonly, we'll see strategies that implore things like donor-advised funds, charitable trusts, or even building a personal foundation. Alternative legacy options are not just an afterthought of estate planning. They can really give one a sense of purpose and drive you to a whole new level of motivation during your retirement years. Ultimately, identifying what makes you happy is an important factor here. Whether that be philanthropy, or spending some downtime to yourself, or doing things like traveling, or maybe building a small business. It's all part of the plan that needs to be taken into consideration.